So we know Michigan State will drop a little bit, but we also know their schedule can correct that down the stretch, especially next week. What about Oklahoma? They have better games as well. I think Baylor and Oklahoma State. So do you expect them? Is there any reason to be concerned about where they are as long as they keep winning?
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, there would be no way that an undefeated Power 5 champ is left out of this thing. So, I felt the same way about Wake Forest, obviously before they lost, but people were talking about how down the ACC is. It was the same thing. I mean, the system was not set up by, again, the commissioners in the room, which obviously the Power 5 commissioners carry a lot of weight. Like, they didn't set up a system where, an undefeated Wake Forest ACC champion wouldn't have made the playoff. And it's the same with Oklahoma. Plus, they have the name brand recognition, which we know isn't supposed to matter, but does. So, no, I mean, the committee clearly is also going to say, hey, well, we're going to evaluate you in the Caleb Williams era, because this is something we've learned from basketball selection committees, but also from this committee over the years is player availability matters. So if they're going to be determining, on December 5th, who is going to play 3 weeks from then, they're going to evaluate based on who the quarterback would be at that time. So if Oklahoma continues to win and looks good doing it, and they feel like things are changing in the Caleb Williams era, they're going to carry weight and kind of discount some of the shakier performances before he started to start.
Chatting with Nicole from The Athletic, of course. Nicole, let me ask you about Georgia for a second, because clearly they've been the best team all year, and many are wondering, and I realize this is a 4-week away question, but do they have a game to burn somewhere based on what you're seeing and based on their play?
Yeah, I think they do. Will they do it? Probably not. But yeah, I mean, this is clearly one of those years where there's lots of flaws on a lot of these top teams. We very well may have a 2-loss Big Ten champion or a 2-loss Alabama if it's a close loss in the SEC title game. Like, there will be consideration for teams, with more losses on the resume than we're used to seeing. And I think that's a good thing, because I think it's important that, an Ohio State team, let's say it's Ohio State, that they went out and they played Oregon and it didn't eliminate them from playoff consideration. So ultimately, that's an aside. That would be a good thing. But I think that means that Georgia, and especially the way the committee is talking about them already, they're in this tier that's by themselves right now. And it's sort of like last year when we knew that Notre Dame could suffer a loss in the ACC champ game and still make the playoff. Like, there will be so much of a buffer for Georgia based on what they've done and the way that the committee views them, that they're going to have that wiggle room. And we already have seen this year, and we've seen in years past, that the committee will value wins over punishing teams for losses. And I think Alabama's a really good representation of that, because I think Alabama would have been the number 2 team in the country if they were undefeated as well. So they're really not getting penalized for that loss to A&M. We saw Mississippi State in the rankings last week despite 3 losses, because the committee likes their 3 wins. So it's going to be the same for Georgia. They're going to be able to write off a loss if they need it. So I think they can afford it. Do I think they're going to take their foot off the gas pedal and actually lose a game? That's a different question. But I do think that they're probably going to be in that position like Notre Dame was last year, where you knew that they could suffer a loss and still be totally fine.
And finally, Nicole, the CFP in general, we've been having this conversation for months now, and the summer was tumultuous. They met again last week, still incomplete in terms of really what their path forward is. What are you hearing in terms of are they going to get this thing together, or is conflict going to remain?
Well, I hope they do. I think that an expanded playoff would be good for the sport. We've talked about that so many times, right? The idea that there would be more access for more teams, and that everyone would start the season with a path to the event, to the important, the important event that determines the national champion. And right now, so many teams start the season knowing there is no chance and no path. So that would be important. And then it would obviously keep more teams and players and fan bases and everyone engaged in the season longer, because there would be more meaningful games down the stretch, because you probably have 20-something teams still in the hunt, in the final weeks of the season. So I hope that they can get together. I think, it's kind of crazy to think about different events that really don't have anything to do with the college football playoff eventually impacting, the timeline of this process, such as, again, conference realignment and relationships between people in the room. And also just, again, these outstanding feelings for new commissioners who weren't on a working group that began 2.5 years ago, right? Like there's all these outside factors that are impacting what's happened in that room. But, I do think there's a lot of support in the room for a 12-team playoff. There's support for 8. So there's general support for expansion. It's just about getting to the agreement on the format. And people won't really know until, you get in that room and people are willing to concede on certain points and compromise. So I think there's optimism, but there's also, you got people who are glass half full and people who are glass half empty about figuring out the size. So I hope so. I think that it would be good for the sport to start it as soon as possible, which would be the 2024 season. But, we'll have a much better idea of that in about 3 weeks. And, again, hopefully it's positive news, because I think, going through thinking about, 5 more seasons of a 4-team playoff and the frustrations we feel about Cincinnati not getting a fair shake, and we're going to go back to the world, if Clemson gets back up and it's going to be the same teams every year. It still is a lot of the same teams right now. That just exacerbates the problems and really points to the need to expand for access and engagement. So, I'm hopeful, but, it's very mixed when you talk to people in that room about who is optimistic and who is just sort of resigned to the fact that this may not expand until the next contract, which would be the 2026 season.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.